It was a cool Tuesday night as I twisted the paper clip in the lock of the front door, attempting to quietly gain entry into the house. Mr. Pietrov had passed away 4 days ago, and the house had been locked up officially, windows boarded, and caution tape covering the doors. Someone had made it a point to keep everyone out from stealing his possessions. That's why I was here. Stealing from the deceased is a victimless crime, and since I had never seen anyone visit Mr. Pietrov in the 20 years I had lived nearby, I assumed he had no family. I convinced myself that poor Pietrov's belongings would probably be sold at an auction or taken by the bank, and being in a financially tough spot right now, I could use the money more than they could. Still, the obituary in my pocket felt like a heavy weight as the lock finally gave way with a loud click and the door creaked open. The interior of the house was pitch black, and when I flipped the light switch, I realized that the power company had likely shut off the electricity. No problem, that's why I brought a flashlight. Switching on the light, I found myself in an average suburban house with paintings on the walls, regular furniture, trinkets scattered on desks and tables, and some poorly done wallpaper. Despite the rather unremarkable appearance of the house's interior, I believed there would be some valuable items hidden away. I made my way to the bedroom, scanning the walls for hidden safes along the way. Carefully, I pulled out drawers, finding and taking rings, a small roll of cash, and the 2 or 3 electronics I could easily carry. Everything seemed fine. After giving the bedroom one last look, I returned to the living room. A faint moonbeam shone through one of the windows, and a gentle breeze rustled the curtains. I tiptoed into the kitchen hoping to find... I froze. Moonlight? Breeze? When I had entered the house, the windows were nailed shut, boarded up, and the room was pitch black. I was certain there had been no other source of light or air when I opened the door. Carefully, very, very carefully, I shifted my weight and turned back toward the living room. The curtains remained still, but the window was undeniably open. The hairs on my arm stood on end. I covered the flashlight with my hand, allowing the moonbeam to dimly light the room. From the bedroom came a creak, followed by the distinct sound of someone collapsing onto a bed. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Had someone had the same idea as I did? Was I caught, and now the police were inside waiting for me? Was Mr. Pietrov really dead? With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket, grasping the obituary with 2 fingers and slowly pulling it out. I unfolded the paper painstakingly, trying to minimize the rustling sounds. Straining to read the words in the poor light, I didn't fully comprehend what I was reading at first.
It is with great sadness in our hearts that we inform you of the passing of Jake Miller on Wednesday, April 18th.
The rest of the page went blank. Or rather, I stopped seeing. Jake Miller. That's my name. April 18th. That's tomorrow's date. I was holding a copy of my own obituary in my neighbor's house, which I had been robbing. I had to get out of this house. I cautiously stepped back into the living room, heading for the door. The bedroom light turned on. I ran. I rushed out of the door, slamming it shut behind me on my way out. My breath caught in my lungs, and I tasted blood as I sprinted away. I didn't stop running until I was behind my own double-locked door. In my haste, I must have dropped the obituary because it wasn't in my pocket when I reached home. I couldn't sleep the whole night. I drove by Mr. Pietrov's house this morning. All the windows were still boarded up, just like last night. The doors were covered in caution tape, forming perfect little X's, which was strange because I was certain I hadn't retaped them when I panicked last night. As I turned the corner to drive away, I screeched to a halt. A shiver ran down my spine. Written on the side of the house in scarlet letters were 3 words.
You're next, Jake.
2 miles off the coast of Texas, there was an abandoned oil platform that had been turned into a shelter for homeless people. This was against the law, but the authorities didn't seem to pay much attention to us. I'm not sure how long the platform had been there before I arrived, but when I did, it was like a real city on the water. Some people traveled back and forth to the mainland on boats. Others who had been there a long time acted like a city council. There were stores, a clinic, and a gasoline-powered generator to charge cell phones. Local charities and food banks brought fresh water and dry food a few times a month. Everyone got something, but most of it was saved for those who couldn't go to the mainland to find work. The most impressive thing was the garden. Over the years, people had brought soil in buckets, so there were now dozens of planting beds on the old helicopter platform. Nobody officially took care of it, but an older lady named Marta looked after it. I lived there for 7 years. After losing all my belongings, the platform was the first place I ever felt at home. I wandered around alleys and homeless shelters for years. I had almost given up when Henry told me about the platform.
I'm heading to the coast, Tom,
Henry said one day. He was 10 years older than me and a good friend. Without him, I wouldn't have survived my first years on the streets.
I have an old friend who says there's plenty of space on an old oil platform. A guy at the coast will take me there for a few dollars. You should come along.
An oil platform? I asked, doubtful. Why on earth would you want to live on an abandoned oil platform? Sounds risky. Henry laughed and slapped my back.
It's like a floating city. No police bothering you. No store owners kicking you out of their shops. Just a group of people like us coming together to support each other. What have you got to lose?
2 days later, we got a ride to the coast. Henry and I were impressed when we arrived. When he told me about the platform, I had imagined a dirty sleeping place full of trash and waste. It was the opposite. Aside from the rust on the aging structure, the platform was impeccably clean. Nobody slept outside. Every available indoor space was used either as a sleeping area or a food storage. A friendly woman named Maria gave us sleeping bags and blankets when we arrived and led us to an old boiler room with sleeping spots for the night. She said we could leave our stuff in the boiler room, but Henry and I were skeptical.
Don't want someone stealing my stuff,
Henry said shortly.
Leaving things lying around is a good way to get robbed.
You'll find that the community here respects everyone's belongings,
she said. Maria reached into her back pocket and pulled out 2 yellow sheets of paper with handwriting on them and handed them to both of us.
These are the rules here on the platform. If you break the rules 3 times, you'll be permanently banned.
We both started reading this list of rules. Rule 1, no stealing of any kind. Not repaying debts is considered theft. Rule 2, no fighting. Rule 3, no drug use. Rule 4, drinking is allowed in moderation. Rule 5, if you don't contribute to the community, you must work to maintain the platform. Rule 6, do not enter the machinery room below the drilling module.
We have an informal council that meets every Saturday evening in the mess hall. It consists of our oldest residents. They listen to complaints and decide if a rule has been broken. If the incident is serious, the council convenes on the same day.
We thanked her and set about getting settled. Over the next few years, Henry and I fit well into the platform's community. Occasionally, new people joined, and those who had been there a long time moved on. Henry and I spent most of our time on the platform. Before he lost his job and home, Henry worked in construction and welding. The council was impressed with his skills and asked if he'd be interested in helping with facility maintenance. He agreed, but asked if I could help him. It was a good life. The unpleasant part came when we received our first banishment. During a Saturday meeting with the council, a man was brought forward to be held accountable for breaking a rule, his 3rd offense. He was an older man with a long beard and a slender build. His eyes were red from tears as he stood in front of the group.
My name is Albert Gardner,
he said with a trembling voice.
I'm accused of stealing 3 cans of soup from a neighbor. Someone found the empty cans under my bed. I've been set up. Someone knew I had been in trouble twice before and pinned this on me. Have mercy. I have nowhere else to go.
The crowd murmured as the old man cried. Henry and I could hear the different opinions in the community. Some thought there wasn't enough evidence, while others believed Albert was a known rule breaker and likely guilty.
Albert Gardner,
said one of the council members.
This is your 3rd offense, and we can't tolerate theft on the platform. Many here rely on the food donations we receive. You are banned and will not return.
No!
Albert shouted. He pulled out a rusty knife with a handle wrapped in fabric and held it toward the council.
I have nowhere to go!
As the man swung the knife in front of the group, Henry tapped me on the shoulder and motioned for me to follow him. He quietly sneaked down the corridor behind the man. Surprisingly quick for his age, he moved forward and put his arm around Albert's neck.
Take the knife from him!
Henry shouted to me, and I took the blade out of the old man's hand.
Take him to the machinery room below,
Demanded a woman from the council.
We'll hold him there until he can be taken to the shore.
Henry and I carried the struggling man out of the mess hall and down the stairs towards the machinery room. A man followed us and took a key from his pocket and unlocked the door. We threw him inside and slammed the hatch shut, and the man locked it.
You've killed me, you bastards!
Albert yelled from inside. He pounded on the door and threw his weight against the thick metal.
Can you hear me? You've killed me! They won't take me to the shore! Those damn things will kill me!
Henry and I turned to leave, but the old man's cries of fear and agony echoed in my head. What was he talking about? I would find out years later. Henry was a hard worker and well-liked in the community, but in his later years he became prone to drinking. He managed to keep it hidden for a while, but over time he became aggressive when drunk. That's when the problems began. His first offense was a simple fight. Henry sat on his bunk drinking cheap alcohol and loudly talking to anyone who would listen. A man who slept in the far corner of our area asked him to be quiet so he could sleep. Without warning, Henry punched the man in the face and told him to shut up. The second offense came when Henry, while drunk, rummaged through another man's belongings to find cigarettes. He found half a pack of crumpled Marlboros and closed the bag as the man walked in. Henry gave it back, but the damage was done. His final offense came when a woman and her husband asked Henry to fix a leak in one of the sleeping houses. He insisted that it had already been fixed, but they told him the leak was still there. Feeling offended, Henry pushed the husband away and told him to get lost. When the man asked him to come and look at the leak, Henry punched him. With that, the council decided his fate and had 2 men take him to the machinery room to wait for a departing boat. That night, as I returned to my bunk, I saw all of Henry's belongings laid out on his bed. I began packing them into a bag to take to the machinery room for his ride back to the shore. Once I'd collected them, I made my way down the stairs to the lower level of the platform. When I reached the lower level, a council member, Carl, was standing guard next to the door to the machinery room. Henry pounded on the door and begged the man to let him out. He stood motionless, staring in my direction.
Tom, stop!
The man said to me.
Henry has already been sentenced. We're just waiting for a boat.
I know, I said, showing him the bag of my friend's belongings. Just wanted to drop off his things so he can take them with him. Don't want him to go with nothing.
Just leave it there. I'll make sure he gets it before...
Suddenly the air was filled with tortured screams. You could always hear muffled cries on the upper levels when someone was locked up and waiting for banishment, but the thick floor panels made them inaudible. Up close, I could hear the fear in my friend's voice.
What the hell is that?
Henry shouted.
Let me out of here! It will kill me! Open the damn door!
You have to go.
Carl said, pointing to the stairs. There's something in there, I yelled. Let him out.
That's how it works here, Tom. If you don't want to be with him, you'd better leave.
I could see the keys to the room on a ring on his belt. I'm not sure what got into me, but I threw the bag toward Carl's head and lunged forward to grab the keys. He was momentarily shocked but quickly regained himself and started to fight back. After I landed 2 blows to the side of his head, he slumped to the floor. I took the keys from his belt and opened the door. As the door squeaked open, I started yelling for Henry, but the words caught in my throat. Above my friend stood a gaunt creature covered in damp, scaly skin. Gill openings opened and closed on its neck, and violet eyes stared at me from its bulbous head. As I made eye contact with it, the creature opened its huge jaws and hissed before grabbing Henry's lifeless body by the head. It turned toward an opening next to the drilling shaft and began dragging Henry in that direction. A purplish trail followed behind them. Henry's eyes were barely open as he raised his hand in my direction, seeking help. The creature's hand twisted, and a dry cracking echoed through the machinery room before it tossed Henry's lifeless body through the hole. A crooked hand reached out in my direction, mimicking the same gesture Henry had made. The creature opened its mouth again and let out a hellish laugh. After finishing its mockery, it stepped back and fell through the hole into the rolling waves below. That same night, I left the platform and drove as far away from the coast as I could. After a few days in a homeless shelter in Houston, I left the state. Now I live in Omaha. There's plenty of work on the farms, and I managed to get a small apartment. The green pastures make me feel safe, but when I try to sleep at night, the sound of the ocean still echoes in my head. I haven't told anyone what I saw. The authorities wouldn't believe me anyway.
I hope this is the right place to post this. If it's not, feel free to guide me in the right place. I'm a bit confused and honestly bewildered. Let me explain. My name is Steve. It's not my real name, but I believe in anonymity. I'm the manager of a restaurant chain that specializes in breakfast food. I won't give the name, but the food is a grand slam. I work the night shift 5 days a week. The hours aren't that bad, but it sure drags from time to time, especially during the week. The weekends, however, the place can be popping during the early morning hours. For example, 3 weeks ago, a group of teenagers entered the establishment, visibly intoxicated, and proceeded to order a massive amount of food. They were so drunk, they picked fights with some of the other customers, and I had to physically remove them. Great times. For the most part, however, things are tame. There is an elderly couple that comes in almost every night around 11:30. They don't say much. Actually, the wife never talks. The husband orders the same thing every time: pot roast with mashed potatoes and an unsweetened tea. The wife never orders anything. Instead, she just sits there and watches the husband eat. I thought at first that she was just there to accompany her husband. But I started realizing just how strange this entire ordeal was. Every night at 11:30 on the dot, they'd come in. The husband would tip his hat to me, and I'd go ahead and just start the order of the pot roast with mashed potatoes. I'd bring his drink out, he'd smile, take a sip, and just sit there staring at his wife. The head cook, whom we'll call Dave, always had a theory that the wife was a prisoner or a slave, and he was just out here showing her off to assert his dominance. Yes, Dave smokes a lot of weed. It started to become routine for me every time I worked. They'd come in, I'd get the order started and watch as the husband ate while his wife just stared at him. He always left a $20 tip for the waiter, who was mainly me, so it was easy money. The old man was nice, his name was Edwin, but his wife, as I said, never spoke. Every time I went to speak to her, Edwin would just stare at me as if I had no business to talk to his wife. That's the last time I'd ever try to talk to her. As terrible as this sounds, I liked a constant $20 tip every night from the same guy. During the night shift as the manager, I also am the main waiter due to staffing cuts and whatnot. As I've said, it can get pretty hectic, but the staff I have, one cook, myself, and another waitress, Steph, we do a good job. I worked New Year's Eve night at the restaurant, and as I expected, it was a madhouse. Drunken idiots galore. Upper management did not even schedule correctly, and it was just myself, Steph, and Dave. We tried our best to get the food out as fast as we could, but we had our limitations. Some customers left. Some customers complained, but not Edwin. Edwin just sat there and waited patiently for his food. I brought out his food and drink, apologized profusely, but he just smiled and slipped me a $50 bill. He winked and nodded his head, telling me to take it. The rest of the night went better after the generosity of Edwin. Once things died down, I decided to take my 15-minute break and thank Edwin for his kindness, and formally introduce myself after all this time. Hello, sir. My name is Steve. I'm the night manager and waiter here. First of all, how was your food? Did it live up to your expectations?
Yes, thank you. Delicious as always, my son.
Great. I want to personally thank you for your generosity. That tip meant a lot to me.
No problem at all. I saw how busy you guys were and thought you deserved something nice for the new year.
I just came over to formally introduce myself, as I've seen you eat here almost every day. We've only talked once, I believe. Edwin, right?
Yes, that is my name, Edwin James Conkrell.
Well, Edwin, I said with a smile as I shook his hand, it's a pleasure to meet you. For a man pushing 80, his grip was surprisingly strong. So, sir, I've always wondered, what brings you here every night?
I beg your pardon?
Perhaps he didn't hear me, so I repeated, what brings you here every night? Edwin sat there, looked down at his empty plate, then back up to me.
It's a long story. I don't want to bore you.
There was a quick pause.
My wife and I ate at this restaurant since the day it opened. Every night we would come down here and enjoy the scenery and the food. Once my wife passed last year, I decided to come down here and continue the tradition. Sometimes I can feel her next to me.
I didn't know what to do or say for that matter. I just stared at him. He got up and stared directly at me.
Did you know my wife Ethel?
I was choked up. I somehow managed to shake my head as he patted me on my shoulder.
Shame. She was such a beautiful woman. Have a blessed day, Steve. I shall see you tomorrow.
He went to walk away, but for some reason I stopped him. Edwin?
Yes.
I walked up to him. I'm sorry for your loss.
It's quite all right, son. Thank you very much for your kind words and wonderful food. Tell your cook he does an amazing job.
We shook hands as he and his wife left. I always look forward to seeing Edwin every night. I hope he knows she is still with him wherever he goes. I cannot describe to you how I feel right now. What I'm experiencing is so detached from the normal, I'm almost convinced I've finally gone insane. Almost. My wife B died during childbirth. She was gorgeous, funny, intelligent, stubborn. A woman whose laugh was so loud eating in restaurants was a challenge, and whose stare was so intense it made my hands shake. I lost her as she gave birth to our daughter, Sam. Of course, I could have resented Sam for taking away what was once mine in a way nothing else can be, for taking what was so truly and utterly pure. But I didn't. I knew B wouldn't have wanted any resentment. She wouldn't have wanted our only child to have a life ruined by hate. But this isn't about grief. This isn't about the physical sucker punch of losing forever something you loved. This is about something far more sinister. My daughter was lively, always running and screaming, leaping up and down the climbing frame, causing havoc in her nursery classes. So for her 6th birthday, a trip with friends to the movies had left her so pent up with energy, I could barely keep up with her as she dipped and dodged between people on the pavement. She'd occasionally turn back, through the sea of people, and shout, "Daddy, come on!" in a tone that was almost petulant. I couldn't help but love her. I tried to chase her, I really did. She was too busy looking at me when she dashed out into the road, and the bus didn't have time to stop. A sickening crunch, and the world fell silent. I cradled her broken form in my arms, too numb to weep, too hurt to move. All I could feel was the warm blood gently seep into my clothes. In the state of shock I was in, I could just think about how I was going to wash my jeans. It sounds horrid, I know, but a loss like that tears everything away from you and leaves you with only the bare thought process that make us human. The next week was a blur. I cannot place a single memory to a time, in between friends and family extending their condolences, and the howling sobs of mine that would break out at any moment, a door slamming, the gentle hum of the fridge, or voices laughing on the radio. I attended her funeral dressed all in black. By dressed, I don't mean merely clothes. My very essence was dark. I couldn't feel or think, and the day continued as I went through the motions, like a dying man treading water. Everyone wanted to tell me about Sam, and how perfect she was, what an angel she was, as if I didn't know, as if I didn't realize what a gift my own daughter was. The man stood out from the rest as he walked up to me and handed me this large leather book. I assumed at the time he was a parent of one of Sam's friends, handing me a collection of their photos together. Or maybe I was too numb to even process his cold hands, and how he never mentioned my daughter once. For a month I was lost. I drank and stayed in our now empty apartment alone, watching old box sets, too numb now to even cry. It was only when my sister arrived, when she held my hand and talked to me, that I began to come out of my shell. She'd sit and listen to the most inane things I said, and gently coaxed me out of my depression. Not completely, but enough for me to begin to live what was almost a real life again. That was when I opened the book. I decided to remember Sam for all the joy she gave, and was prepared to reflect on her life without feeling miserable. I opened to the first page. It was essentially a binder, full of Polaroid photos of my daughter growing up. I furrowed my brow. They were taken from a distance, blurred slightly, and I was in a few of them. I began to feel sick, but hoped that the following photos would provide some explanation. I came up with every excuse of how the man obtained these photos, desperate to view the moments of my daughter's life without a sense of trepidation. The photos grew closer and closer to my daughter's birthday. I could see the day I gave her a tiny bike after she turned 5, and the skinned knees that ensued. The book had so many more pages that I assumed the rest were empty, but there was a photo of her just before the movies on her 6th birthday. I could recognize the pink raincoat she insisted on wearing, and my hands on her shoulders. There was no photo of the crash. Instead, her life continued inside this book. Her 7th birthday had a photo of me and her in the garden, covered in paint, with a huge canvas on the floor and an extremely messy painting. Her 7th birthday. Her 7th birthday. The reality of what I was seeing hit me then, and I slammed the book shut. I sat there at the kitchen table staring at the leather. This must be some sadistic Photoshop, I hoped. Someone had taken the time to pull a horrid prank on me. I say I hoped, because essentially I couldn't believe the other explanation if there even was one. Gritting my teeth, I decided I had nothing to lose and kept reading. I can't explain the emotions I felt whilst I read accurately, listening to the sound of the page turning. I can try, but nothing could prepare you for something like this. Her life continued, showing her losing her baby teeth, her first day of senior school. My turning of the pages became more frenzied, and I began to notice something. The photographer was getting closer, closer to her. As she grew older, not in every photo, but a general trend, the photographer was getting closer and closer. More daring, perhaps. She was beautiful, stunning. As a teenager, she looked just like her mother, all curls and smiles. I grew older too, but the photos began to include me less and less. Her 16th birthday was strange. A group of her friends sitting outside drinking from little plastic cups at a picnic. But there was someone in the background. Near the bushes of the park where this was taken, a dark figure stood. You wouldn't have noticed him if not for the small shadow he cast on the grass. I leant back for a moment and exhaled. This was too weird. I'd been so caught up in watching my little girl grow up, I hadn't thought about how this would end. Moments like this are so utterly surreal that sometimes you remove yourself from them. I almost felt like I was watching myself read these, like this was a dream or a program on the television. I continued. The dark figure became more and more present in each photograph. I could almost make out features. His presence was towering, and as I turned the page, I expected to see him disappear. But instead, as the photographs grew closer to her 18th, each birthday was marked by a caption underneath the Polaroid saying another year. She was no longer somewhere I recognized. Instead, the photos were of her in a dimly lit house, her face contorted by fear, striking all sorts of weird poses. Sometimes she would be dressed like an ancient queen, or she would be dressed like a maid scrubbing the floors. The figure was there even closer now. His legs or his arm would appear in each and every one. No matter how she was dressed, in every photo her face had this desperately pained expression. It killed me. There were bruises on her face. She looked thin. I couldn't do it. This was sick. Properly sick. My girl. She was looking straight at the camera, crying. She was on her knees, dressed in a black evening dress, with an apple in her mouth and her hands bound behind her back. Her makeup was ruined by her tears. It was as if she was pleading me, begging me to help. But I couldn't. I closed the book and left the room, my whole body convulsing with sobs. I couldn't call the police, of course. She was dead. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't the content of what I saw. It's that there were so many pages left.
It started when we called out to the stars, into the darkness. We felt so small, tumbling through vast emptiness while clinging to the skin of the world, and without a single reason why. We were curious, yes, but ultimately I think we were just terribly frightened. And we were young, so very young. We were children, and like a lonely lost child, we did the only thing we could think of to make it stop. We did what we thought we had to do to make the universe make sense. We called for help. For years we scanned the sky for a sign. We sent signals to the stars and the darkness beyond. Are we alone? But the skies were quiet, always so quiet, leaving us to our own makings. But crying children never cease, and neither did we. We sent calls into every corner of space for decade after decade. We refused to believe no one was out there. They had to be. Yet for some unknown reason, they never answered us. Everyone remembers when that changed. They think it responded to the Arecibo message from 1974. The response to the Arecibo message was received almost 3 months ago in 2 separate parts. The first part of the message was received at the Hat Creek Radio Observatory in California. The Allen telescope array picked up what sounded like static interference that continued on for over an hour. It consisted of unintelligible screeching and buzzing sounds that continued without pause for the whole hour. The meaning of this message was never discovered, if it had one. The only thing we knew was that the signal's origin came somewhere in the Hercules constellation, near Messier 13. As soon as that signal stopped, the real message began. We made contact that day, and we were asked a question.
Who is there?
It came not through the radios, but as a voice. A voice inside all of our heads asked the question to all of us. I heard it. My wife heard it. The young heard it, and the old heard it. Even the deaf heard it. Everyone, everywhere, heard this voice whisper that question in their heads in every language on earth. I remember it almost too clearly. It asked in that familiar yet indescribable voice that's always there in my mind. It was like one of my own thoughts had gone rogue and had decided to speak directly to me. The world seemed to stop as everyone listened for what came next.
Where are you?
The heavy question seemed to linger in our minds for hours afterwards, and then for days, and then for weeks. That day changed everything. There were the doubters from the very beginning, and the holy ones, who claimed that God had spoken to all of us, and that the time to repent was now. There were those who claimed they'd heard nothing, and those who'd claimed that the aliens had given them their own secret messages. And of course, there were those who truly believed that we had been contacted for the first time by an extraterrestrial race like us, one ready to communicate, ready to lead us out of the dark. We were wrong. We never made contact with alien life, at least nothing comprehensible or discernible to human understanding. The stars are vast, and in their vastness, our voices had touched the ears of something truly incomprehensible, something hungry and malevolent, the voice. We realized our mistake when the ground started to groan. Beneath our feet, everywhere, the ground seemed to moan. The muffled sounds shook through the dust and dirt below us. No one knew what was causing it, at least, not until the calls started coming in. The graveyards were screaming. All at once, the dead had started screaming. Every deceased man, woman, and child was turning in their graves. All the animals did so too. Every dog, every cat, everything that had ever walked this earth. The cries of ancient whales shook the seas, and the shrill screeching of birds echoed in the forests. The caskets shook, and the morgues howled. The voices stopped together in an instant, leaving the world in an amplified silence. In their absence, a new sound filled the air. The voice returned.
I hear you.
It came as a whisper from behind, an ominous yet oddly playful presence that felt so close but was truly still so far away. It let us breathe in the silence for a minute before it made us a promise. It was a promise we all knew to be true.
I am coming.
The voice was gone, and the air was again filled with screams. This time they were from the living. After the voice had gone, we were left to our own devices. Millions panicked, and rightfully so, as chaos took hold of the streets. Many would die in the violence and the gunfire of that night. They would be known as the raptured before long, and the rest of us were the condemned. We could only wait. The screaming dead was only the first of the side effects that we felt as the voice approached. The closer it got, the more we felt it. That first night after the screaming, we noticed the stars bleed for the first time. A section of the western sky had turned black, blacker than the night. It was only truly visible because of the ring of stars around it. The light from those stars had turned red, and they seemed to bleed across the sky like food coloring dropped into water. Their light swirled and flowed all around the edge of some unseen mass. I knew then that I was staring into the face of the voice. Our scientists claimed that nothing was there, and that their radar and scans always came up empty. Their telescopes could see nothing but darkness in that section of space. However, the proof was right in front of us as every night that ring of darkness got wider and more stars bled in the sky. We watched it come. As each night passed, the black spot would widen, and more stars would distort and bleed around it. During the day, a new hell would greet us. The side effects worsened. The day always brought something new. I'm sure most of what happened will go untold and unknown. The animals started disappearing, all of them. No tracks, traces, or bodies were left behind. Pets would run away, some violently so. They all retreated, never to be seen again. The forests were left abandoned, the oceans empty, the air was left silent. The world left seemed empty and lonely. They left like water receding from the shore, just before the tsunami breaks. One day about 2 weeks ago, scientists tried to talk to the voice again. They hoped perhaps to reason with it. They told it about what was happening on our world and asked it questions. The scientists begged. It didn't speak. When asked what the voice sent a response. The next night the skies lit up with streaks of fire. It was alight for hours, blazoned with orange and red. We didn't realize the effects until the next day when the televisions turned to static and the telephones refused to work. We watched as all the satellites were knocked out of the heavens. After that, reports became rumors and rumblings, sanity a thing of the past. The air chilled and weighed us down. The voice was nearly here, and everyone felt it. It rained for a week after the satellites fell. The rain was salty and mired with an unknown filth that turned the grass black. Maybe the satellites tracked something back in with them when they hit the sky. No one knew for sure. All we know is that it fell from clouds black as charcoal that blotted out the sun, like liquid ash. When the clouds went away, the skies were empty. There were no clouds, yet the sky hung low and gray. If the sun was anywhere in the sky, it never made itself known. Even it had abandoned us. Each day grew slowly darker and darker until night and day became almost the same. Some people would claim later that they'd seen things in the dark, creatures with gangly limbs and crooked faces, lurking in the corner of their vision. They were tall, white creatures that looked molted or rotten through their transparent skin. Appearances would last for just a second or two before vanishing without a trace. Some believed this was the first step in the aliens' invasion, but the rest of us didn't know what to think. We just knew that it was nothing that simple or benign. They must have been hallucinations, just more madness to endure, but ultimately as harmless as anything else. As harmless as the screams of the dead, the missing animals, and the dying sky. Appearances slowly increased in duration and number. I think everyone saw them once at the least, but I don't think a single person would ever guess why they were truly here. They never touched nor spoke to anyone, and they certainly never harmed anyone. Most who got good looks at them described them as mournful or sorrowful looking. Some even claimed the creatures watched over them at night, and others even claimed that it seemed as if the creatures were sorry for them. One claimed to have even seen one prostrate upon the ground, hands clasped above its head. He said it was praying for us. Prayer was no help. The churches and places of worship that had divided us for so long failed to bring hope to any in the end. The voice let them pray and beg for a while, but just days ago the voice ended it all. No one questioned how, for at this point nothing that happened surprised anyone anymore. But on the final day, all books of worship burned. Every last Bible, every Quran, everything. People rushed to their centers of faith but found no solace. The churches and temples had suffered the same fates, if not worse. The people were left, abandoned by their greatest hopes. There were rumors of churches all over the world, with walls formed from the bodies of those who sought refuge. They were merged to the walls, stuck to them like flies in a trap. They died still pleading for hope, but they were beyond God's help. The rest of us had learned to stop begging. We waited. The final message came. From beyond the sky it fell upon us. The voice echoed and it spoke the simple truth.
I am here.
There is a darkness beyond the horizon, the likes of which I doubt has ever been seen. It brings with it the screams of countless souls, and it moves fast. The stars are dying now, and I know they'll never be seen again. I leave this not as a warning. No, it's far too late for that. Instead, consider this the last realization, the last humanity will ever know. For we used to wonder whether or not we were alone and lost, but never whether or not we were safe and hidden. The universe is infinite, and our understanding was significantly more finite. We should never have beckoned to the darkness. Instead, we should have clung to the light and closed our eyes every time we were turned to the void. As the final minutes approach, I hold one final truth to be certain. I now know why the skies were always so quiet.
I should have known something was wrong before the exam. I'm 21 years old, in good physical shape, with no pains, complaints, or illnesses. But there were things that seemed strange to me, like, for example, not needing a haircut for 6 months. Or the little scratches and scrapes that never quite healed. I even had issues with insects. Sometimes I'd wake up because of itching, only to notice several ants crawling up and down my body. Other times I'd see patches of dirt on my elbows and knees. I loved nature and hiked a few times a week, so I didn't pay much attention to the insects and dirt. Until I had a biopsy on a suspicious-looking mole. I knew something was wrong when Dr. Johnson entered the room. He sat across from me with a serious expression.
We need to talk about the results of your biopsy.
Panic started. It's melanoma. I have cancer. I'm only 21. He said.
We analyzed the cells and they don't appear cancerous. However, they're dead. All the cells we analyzed were not abnormal in any way, but they weren't alive either. Necrosis can occur for various reasons, like cold, for example, but I saw no signs of frostbite or anything else that could cause skin tissue necrosis.
What's wrong then? I asked.
We need to do more tests.
What do you think it is? I asked, being unsure.
I'll be honest with you. I really don't know right now. But don't worry, whatever it is, I don't think it's a big deal.
He was wrong. Dr. Johnson removed the mole and sent it to the lab. The analysis showed all cells were dead. Then he took skin samples from a few other parts of my body. They were dead too.
Usually, when cells die, including skin cells, they undergo apoptosis, which means they force themselves to implode before turning into cancer. But these cells, they're intact. It's just that the cellular processes aren't happening. It's almost like they're frozen in time. Have you been exposed to radiation or extreme temperatures?
I shook my head.
Any recent infections?
I shook my head again.
I'm going to refer you to a rheumatologist. I want to rule out autoimmune disease. I also want to refer you to my colleague, Dr. Kruger. He specializes in rare skin conditions.
So he had no idea. I stared at my skin, my arms, my feet. Everything looked perfectly normal. What's wrong with me? While waiting for my appointments with the new doctors, I decided to tell my friend Melanie. Melanie was one of the smartest people I knew, and she had studied biology. It was unlikely she knew anything. But what else could I do? Just stare at the wall and wait for more tests?
I think we should take a blood sample.
Melanie said after I told her everything. Then she opened a drawer and rummaged through various lab materials. She pricked my finger, which hurt, but she skillfully engaged me in conversation to distract me from the pain. She asked about my break from school 6 months ago and if I felt better. Then she put a drop of blood on a slide. She placed the cover slip on it, and the blood instantly spread into a transparent red pool. Then she slid it into the microscope and worked on the controls. "What are you looking for?" I asked, standing awkwardly behind her.
Things, just wait.
I waited patiently while Melanie continued to work on the controls and peered through the microscope. Then she gasped. What is it?"
See for yourself.
I put my eye to the microscope. I don't know much about biology. I study history and haven't used a microscope since 9th grade. But I could kind of tell what was happening. The small reddish blobs floating around were probably red blood cells, and the yellowish liquid was plasma. I don't see anything strange.
Can you see the white blood cells?
I squinted, and then I saw one. It was clear, spotted, and kind of prickly around the edges instead of round. Yeah, I think so. It's not moving. None of them are. I heard her footsteps on the floor as she started to pace.
Normally, white blood cells move around, trying to neutralize threats, get rid of infections, stuff like that. But yours aren't. I think they're dead. It doesn't make sense. If all your white blood cells were dead, you would also be dead. You wouldn't be able to fight off the slightest illness or infection. Even the tiniest paper cut would get infected. But you are okay. Alive.
Melanie paced back and forth, and her voice grew more excited, frenetic.
There are so many genetic diseases and disorders we haven't classified yet. So many medical miracles that are still mysteries. What if you're one of them?
She took a deep breath.
How did life start? We still don't know exactly. Can something be alive while its cells are dead? Before we didn't think so. But you're sitting here, alive.
She started to pace faster, back and forth. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't like the way Melanie seemed so excited, so obsessed. I almost jumped as she stopped pacing and turned to face me, a huge grin on her face.
We'll show Dr. Reinhard. That's what we'll do. We can keep taking samples here, in the lab. Figure out what's going on. It could change the world, Annika. Don't you see? It could change everything we've ever known about life itself.
I got up and slowly backed toward the door. I think I'm going to go. I have an early class tomorrow.
No, stay. We have so much to discuss.
I grabbed the doorknob and ran out. I thought she'd follow me, maybe chase me down, inject me with horse tranquilizer, and start experimenting on me. But she didn't. When I turned around, the hallway was completely empty. I visited various doctors and did all sorts of tests. I covered my tracks by using a different doctor for each test, but the result was always the same. From cheek cells to skin cells to blood, everything in my body is dead. It doesn't make sense. My organs function. My kidneys filter my blood. My eyes can still see. My muscles contract and stretch as I move. Yet no matter what tests I conduct, biopsies, samples, blood, I can't find a single living cell in my body. I avoided Melanie, but about 3 weeks after storming out of her lab, she suddenly stood at my door. I only opened it because I thought she was the mailman. Melanie, I started. I'm in the middle of... She pushed past me into my apartment. Melanie, I startled. I'm in the middle of... She pushed past me into my apartment.
I need to tell you something. Please just sit down.
She looked distraught, not fascinated and excited anymore, but disturbed. I sat down, my heart starting to race.
I sent your blood sample to a lab. They do very detailed analyses. And I thought it would be a good thing, but they didn't just look at your cells. They examined the molecular composition, the proteins, the molecules, the atoms, the elements. And everything is wrong, Annika. There are no molecules you'd find in a normal human cell.
What? What do you mean?
It's dirt. Dirt and mud and clay. When they ran the mass spectrometer and analyzed the molecular composition of your cells, they matched the profile of dirt, not organic molecules you'd find in a human body.
What? This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Have you ever heard of a golem?
She asked, her voice now high and shrill. A golem. The word seeped into me. Right. The beings in Jewish folklore made from dirt or clay or other lifeless substances, animated by God or some other force, anthropomorphic, but never human, animated, but never alive. You're not saying... I shook my head.
That's insane. I can't... 6 months ago,
she said and pulled out her phone.
Annika Dreyfus, you died from a seizure. Look at the picture. You can't tell me that doesn't look exactly like you.
I looked at the article. There was a photo of me, an obituary, in loving memory. I felt dizzy. I felt weak. Every muscle in my body felt like it was contracting.
Someone couldn't bear to lose you,
she said, placing her phone on the table.
And this is how they decided to deal with it.
I stared at my hands, at my skin, made of mud, made of clay, animated but never alive.